resort for them, and that's why we see so many trans suicides, is because they feel like there aren't any alternatives. There's nothing for them to push forward. And for me, even as being a suicidal person at one point in time in my life, that I had to figure out, like, by me hurting myself, I'm allowing these people to win. There is no way by me taking away and not taking away from the pain that people feel when being, suicidal and having mental health instabilities. But in a sense, we're taking away from our community, right? We're taking away from the forefront that we need. And so with me personally, even when I dealt with so much, and that's the one thing people always say about me, is you're so resilient, you're so resilient. And it's just like, well, sometimes I don't have a choice. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes that's what makes me push through the day. When I'm at my lowest and when I'm feeling so down and out, and I dealt with a handful of bullshit today. But I'm here, and nobody can take that away from me. So I have to figure out what did I learn from somebody else's ignorance? How does that make me stronger, and how do I push forward? And there's nothing wrong with, reaching out to community. I feel like a lot of times we talk about community, but we never interact with community. And we tend to, think ourselves out and be alone and not actually deal with our issues, and know that there are people that actually care and want and have concern for the issues that we're facing. But because, especially for so many trans and queer and gender nonconforming people who have built up these walls, you know what I'm saying? Like, for me, I have built up so many walls. Most of my life, I have pretty much pushed people away and said, I'd rather do this by myself than to have you let me down. And so, after I got incarcerated and having people write me letters and just been like, why the fuck do you care about me? You know what I'm saying? Like, I even had to ask myself, like, why the fuck do these people care about me? You know what I'm saying? And to realize that people actually love. Like, that's a thing. Like, it's not just a word. You know what I'm saying? Like, people actually love you, and people understand. And for a lot of people, you think that you are the only person going through that situation. Like when Tiq was saying, like, I thought I was the only one. I did too. I literally didn't even know what the term trans meant. And I beat myself up on a day-to-day basis because my mom always pushed this idea, like, I would prefer you to be a gay man than to be a woman. And it was so hard because with that, I didn't know how to love myself, and I didn't know how to appreciate myself. And so with that came the resiliency, you know what I'm saying? After being homeless for so many years of my life, and I'm just like, I just want to die. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just wish a rock would fall on me or something. Just end me right now. Just end me. I will literally pray. And as I was younger, before I transitioned, I remember praying about things, because I grew up in a heavily Christian household. And I remember praying for things like bawling in the bathroom, like, God, please make me a boy, or make me a girl, or make me straight, or make me unconfused, or whatever the case may be. And that traumatized me so much. You know what I'm saying? And resiliency comes from self-love. It comes from understanding yourself and being able to understand yourself. Because sometimes we just think of ourselves in this, like, false context and just being like, oh, I'm just this human with skin and hair. But we're so much more than that, right? We're souls, we're beings, you know what I'm saying? We're gods and goddesses, and we take that away from ourselves. And we don't understand that, with the social constructs of gender and race and all of these things, they prevented us from actually thriving the way that we need to. So for some of us, we have no choice but to be resilient, right? As a black woman, as a black trans woman, I have no choice but to be resilient or give up. And I refuse to give up. So resiliency is my next best option. And that's the only way I can look at it.
Say with that, I think that resiliency definitely comes from self-definition, as well as boundaries. So growing up, I've had nothing but childhood trauma that unfortunately followed me into my adult life. And I think when I started transitioning, it was kind of like people just weren't with it. They didn't want to get with it. They didn't want to get to know it. They just weren't having it. They were like, I'd rather you be, you know what I mean? Again, I'd rather you be a gay man than a trans woman. And to take things a little bit more, it was like I wasn't just a trans woman, but I was a smart trans woman. I knew how to ask questions. I knew how to find stuff for myself. Like, I was the type of person that would talk about issues around like 4 or 5 other trans women, and it was like, oh, Nevaeh's on that feminist shit again. But you have to be, you know? Like, literally, like, I think last year, like, when I lost everything, I lost my apartment, I broke my leg, I was living in a hotel, everything. That was kind of like my absolute rock bottom. So I had to start up, and I really had to say, okay, who am I for me? Because I've been trying to fit into this box that other people wanted me to fit into. And it was so uncomfortable, even with like when I was being trans. It was like, I was so pressured into being passable and into being, you know, the best quote unquote tranny that I can be, that everything else about me was like kind of an afterthought. Like, never mind that I was the youngest person who was a program manager at a nonprofit. Never mind that I was like 23, 24, doing seminars. Never mind that like I took some time off of college because I got hired at this job and I'm doing that like in my early to mid 20s. Like, it was just kind of like, oh no, you're supposed to look like this, you're supposed to look like that. You know, I think the biggest mindfuck that I still deal with is when a cisgender woman with like a mustache this heavy tells you, if you're gonna do this, you better make sure that you pass. But she has this. And so you're looking at this like, oh, so since I'm not born with a vagina, I have to be perfect. And I think you have to like separate stuff like that. And I sacrifice a lot to be myself. And I think that's definitely something that you have to prepare for when you're transitioning, because that is a part of resiliency. There are certain members of my family I don't talk to. There are certain friends that I had to get rid of. There's just like certain things that I had to leave behind, because I'm a firm believer that like God kind of spoke to me and said that, you know, if you're gonna move forward, there's just some things and some people that you can't take with you. And so I think resiliency definitely is just knowing who you are and being proud of who you are, and understanding that you still have a lot to learn, and not letting other people define you for you. Because I think that when you do talk about trans, especially trans people of color, we're so stuck in these specific gender roles, like even pre, post transition, everything, that we don't get a chance to know ourselves or fall in love with ourselves more than the ideal of what we should be. And when you fight against that, it's the roughest thing that you can deal with, but it's one of the more enlightening things that you can do as well. And I think whatever you lack or whatever you have given up to be yourself, you find that in a new sense of people, in a new sense of community, or a new sense of family. It's just a matter of being you and not being afraid to be you.
I do want to echo both of my sisters. I do believe that I used to stand in front of the mirror and hate every piece of me, right? Like, no identifying with my skin. So part of it is truly, truly unconditionally loving myself. Loving that I'm a trans woman with a penis, loving that I am undocumented, you know, like everything that society, the rules dictates, it kind of builds my own resiliency, right? And it's just a way for me to say, if, for example, Donald Trump is using this very anti-immigrant, hateful rhetoric against undocumented people in this country, I'm building a wall taller than the China Wall or whatever. So how do I come to me, go dig deep into my own self-love and crumble that internal wall and fight and resist what he's trying to physically build to continue to oppress and create violence and division against our community. So to me, connecting with myself, embracing every part of me, loving myself fully, unconditionally, and also giving other people the opportunity to love me back and find that support with the community. It is the way that, like, when I subconsciously protested outside a detention center, the horrible, inhumane conditions my sisters are being treated and are resisting every day. I wore a shirt that's probably a famous radical feminist, mi existir still, my existence is resistance, and I think that is the biggest message all of us can do when we get back out into society. And yes, thank
you. A lot of my work, some of the most inspiring work that I've been a part of was working at the Tiq Milan Institute, which is the home of the Harvey Milk High School, the only LGBT high school in the country. And it's also a homeless drop-in, a center for homeless and marginally housed youth, particularly LGBT youth, Harvey Milk is also a transfer school, so all of the young people that are at Harvey Milk are there transferred from another school, mostly due to bullying or, have you. So, working here, getting to work with these young people was so inspiring because I was inspired by the resilience in them. I was there working with young people who came from extremely abusive backgrounds, who were, sleeping on different couches every day, who were in youth homes, who had been in and out of the prison industrial complex, but they still found a way to smile and to fight and to create community and to love each other and to be creative and brilliant and genius. And I got to know so many of them on such an intimate level. Like, they really taught me a lot about the resilience in transness and the resilience in communities. And through that work and through the work that I've done with community, not just with the young people, but just all of my colleagues, all of the wonderful people that I've been able to meet, who are doing this work at grassroots levels, who are doing this work on larger scale levels, corporate levels. There are so many people who are involved with wanting to make this community better, right? Who want to see equitability in our community and equality, in our community. There's so many people that are doing this work that have really inspired me. And I think personally, for me, the resilience just comes from a lot of the love that I've had in my life. I always talk about the fact that I come from a very supportive Black family. My mother was my biggest supporter. Like, we had our ups and downs, and we had some really awkward conversations. But my entire family understood that they had to make this transition with me, right? I had to go from being a daughter to a son, from the favorite aunt to the favorite uncle, right? From the little sister to the baby brother. We all did this together, and through it, I was shown such unconditional love. And it really influences, how I live my life, how I approach my relationships, whether it be with my wife or with my friends or with family or with colleagues or in community. The example that was set for me by my family is the example that I try to put forward, right? So for me, the resilience comes in this place where I feel that I have to pay it forward to show people that, you can be loved and that you are loved and that you deserve nothing but the best, and to try to live by example, and to give that up to the young people that we work with and the people that we share space with. So for me, that's where the resilience comes from the love that I've had in my life.
Other questions? So you want to second?
Yeah. So this it's primarily for Jennicet and CeCe, but for anybody, I suppose. But so I think for a lot of people, it's easy to see the problems in the prison industrial complex and the ways that it targets people. But I think the harder jump to make is what's next or what's an alternative. So can you talk a little bit about what are alternatives to an injustice complex and what are alternatives to policing, and especially white privilege policing?
There are definitely. I don't understand why people think it's so far-fetched that this idea without cops in prisons is just like the world would collapse and we would go into calamity. We have to think that prisons didn't always exist, right? That came later in life, and it was formed off the abolishment of slavery. And when the abolishment of slavery came about, they created prisons they created all of these different laws. Everything was against the law for a Black person, especially for a Black man. So anything that you did in your existence was considered illegal. And through that, they would arrest these Black people, and then they had the prisoner leasing system where white folks when slavery was abolished, they will come and rent out the prisoners to continue to do the plantation work or whatever the case may be. So the history of prisons was founded off of the abolishment of slavery, and it just evolved from there. And that mentality still lives on. Like, prisons are is a new form of slavery prisoners are getting literally paid. I remember being in prison and you get a case manager when you go into prisons now and they ask you like, what do you want to do? Do you want to work? Do you want to do this? And I said, no, I don't want to do any of this shit. You would not use me as your mom. I'm going to go sit in my cell and I'm going to finish writing my fucking blog. And that's all I want to do. I don't want anybody to ask me any questions about this fucking prison. But basically, people are getting paid 25 cents an hour. With that, state takes about 10% of that. With that if you pay restitution, they take a percentage of that. So literally, people are paying 7 cents an hour to mop and clean and sweep and dust and to create furniture and shit that we use on a day-to-day basis, and nobody is talking about these issues, right? So prison abolition isn't just about how we're knocking down buildings and ending police culture, but also how are we ending this new slave era that's perpetually putting black and brown bodies in a space where they're further, put into slavery. But not just that, the ways that we think about communities, so I don't know if anybody heard of like transformative justice, where people come together and actually hold accountability for each other. We do not need cops to come and solve our issues every time something happens, because guess what? It only worsens the issue. There's not one time that I've known or have seen or witnessed where a cop came and the situation was hunky-dory. Right? There's never a time a cop came and was like, okay, let's sit down and let's discuss these issues, like as if the motherfucker was Dr. Phil or something. It's not. And he's a bad case too, I shouldn't use him. I'm just saying. And so this idea that we live in a world, we can actually hold each other accountable, right? We do not need cops or the criminal justice system or lawyers or anything to hold each other accountable. I know for a fact that I'm the type of person, if you do something to me, I'm gonna be like, hey, you did this to me, this is why it's wrong, this is how we can fix it, do you want to move on from here, right? We don't need to actually have people stepping in and making situations worse. And in the case of things where, I had this conversation last night where, you talk about prison abolition work, and then you have to think about the people who are in prison who have done what is considered major crimes or violent crimes or sexual assault or things like that. But we also have to remember, majority of the people in prison are in prison for petty drug crimes, right? All of those people that are in there are literally in there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years for having small grams of weed, small grams of coke, when we all know that all people use drugs at the same rate at the same time at any given day, right? And so the people who are affected by that are what, again, black and brown bodies and people of the LGBTQI community, which are usually still black and brown bodies. And so we think about that. So we erase that, and we took that population out. The prison population probably dropped down to what, 50,000? 10,000, right? And so we think about the people who are in prison for major crimes, and then I tell people, think about what a major crime is and think about who created those laws. I was in jail for a major crime. I was in jail for a violent attack, right? But on the sense that nobody actually knows that I was in jail for defending myself. So when we look at the population of people in prison, majority women and cis women and trans women who have been incarcerated on the strength of self-defense, or anybody that's in prison on the terms of self-defense, that is still considered a major crime, right? And I don't think at any time that when we think of major crimes, we think of people who are literally going around. Because the people who commit the most crimes are cops, right? They have no accountability. They get in trouble none whatsoever. And they still get to live their lives and continue to perpetuate violence in communities of color and marginalized communities. So why aren't cops being held accountable for their actions, right? Prisons are based off of capitalism. That's a fact. We all know that people in prisons are just a profit, and that's something that, when it comes to politics, the prison industrial complex, the intersectionalities of the prison industrial complex, which is the media industrial complex, nonprofit industrial complex, medical industrial complex, all of these things have played a big part in why people cipher money in and out of prisons and not into resources that will prevent people from being in prison, right? Also, we have to think about the large majority of people who are incarcerated for their mental instability. Nobody is actually ciphering funds into resources for people with mental health instabilities, like safe spaces for people to come and get proper checkups and have access to medical supplies and whatever they need. But instead, we incriminate and dehumanize and criminalize and demonize people with mental health instabilities, and then we shove them out in society and say, hey, I hope you make it, you know what I'm saying? And then when something fucked up happens, we criminalize them, we incarcerate them, and then we test on them and give them drugs and say, let's dope you up and make you feel better. But, you know, again, that's a part of the medical industrial complex where people are like, hey, we'll give you $10 million if you like get some people to take our drugs. And people are like, hey, yeah, of course, $10 million, woohoo. But not thinking about how other people are being affected by that. So when we think of prison abolition, it's not just this idea of like knocking down bricks of a building or ending police culture. It's about the intersectionalities around it and the people who are actually affected by that. So I just named 4 things that could actually be changed within the prison industrial complex that will literally drop the prison population down to probably 5,000, right? And so how are we not talking about these things? How is the prison population over 2 million people? In this country alone, just the United States. We don't see any of that in any other country other than the United States. President Obama deported more immigrants than any other president, right? But we uphold him and, you know, yeah, we have a black man in the presidency. Yeah. That's amazing. But people still fail to realize the difference between revolutionary and radical, right? It's amazing that we have black people in politics and taking on these forms of systematic racism where people would not normally think that black people would exist, black and brown bodies, I should say, would exist. But nobody is doing anything for our communities. And that's why I said what I said last night about voting. Like, it's your choice to vote, but I would not entertain the rhetoric of this foolishness, right? There's nobody in this presidential campaign that will benefit me in any type of way. You know what I'm saying? So fuck politics, fuck the prison industrial complex. All of these things play hand in hand with each other. And that's why our society is fucked up the way it is, because we still have this mindset that prisons or, you know, destroying prisons would destroy the world and everybody would be killing and stabbing and raping each other. No, we have to think about the issues and why these people are dealing with this. And that's just the real facts.
I want to point out really quick that CU has a contract that they use prison labor for their furniture. And you cannot buy furniture that doesn't fit into that. So just so everybody is aware that CU is very actively, working into that system.
I just want to add and challenge everyone in the room when you think about the school to prison pipeline to also think about school to prison and or detention center pipeline. So add that complexity to the discussion. Thank you.
So, thank you. We have a question here and also one behind. Is there still a question?
Yeah. Well, CeCe's been very eloquent about not voting and not participating in the political system. I'd like to hear what the rest of the panel has to say about that.
You know, here's the thing about like politics. Whenever this type of cycle comes around, I always look for like a potential presidential candidate that are concerned about the issues that I'm concerned about, which means the economy, job sources, human rights issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's just a part of me that is just extremely indecisive. Like, I just don't trust any of the politics. I don't trust any of the presidential hopefuls. And not saying that there aren't any really good ones, because it's like Bernie Sanders is good, like what he says is good, what Hillary Clinton says is pretty good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like anybody but Trump, right? But here's my thing. I don't think that when they do get voted, I don't think that their priorities is going to be to make sure that any of us have a safe space. Like, what about job securities for trans people? What about, making sure that, if a trans person was being murdered or they did defend themselves, that they wouldn't be held accountable for somebody else's BS? Or if, one of us were to be, hurt, murdered, God forbid, that person be held accountable. I mean, we're looking at people very rarely when you talk about trans women, especially trans women of color being murdered, very rarely do you hear people very rarely do you hear people being charged like life sentences or even murder. It's always attempted murder or manslaughter or something else where the most that somebody will get is like 10, 15 years, unless they're like black and they fit a certain demographic. But but it's just like, I just don't trust that I'm gonna be safe like around politics, or if I did like, bring these questions up, it's gonna be the nice thing of like, oh, well, yeah, we see that and we understand that and we're gonna get to it, blah, 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 blah. But it's just something about like this election where it's just really throwing me off. Like, I don't feel comfortable with it at all. I don't trust it. And I'm nervous. I mean, this is like the first time around the cycle, especially the more that our issues are presented. I'm nervous that somebody is going to be counterproductive towards the trans community and the trans movement and literally crush everything that we worked so hard for like the past decade, or especially like the past 2 or so years. We see it all the time, like the bathroom bills like being passed, or even being presented in front of like Senate or what have you. Like,
there was a law that was just passed in, I believe, Michigan, where you can get 15 years.
For sodomy laws, yes.
Oh my
Like,
God.
what type of shit is that where you're so worried about butt sex, but you're not worried about the water crisis? Like, I'm sorry, if butt fucking is that much more important than making sure we have substantial water, there's a problem. And that's something I really don't trust.
I do want to say, as an undocumented person, we don't have that option, right? But I do believe that the politics that this nation was rooted heavily in racism, but either political party doesn't really enact truly transform our communities, especially of color. And that's why, to me, I strongly believe in Black Lives Matter, that the work that Black people have done in this country that will lead us to liberation, because they do have the citizenship and it wasn't even granted, and it's still facing many, many challenges in the system, so don't have the opportunities that other social class or race have in this country. Thank you.
And I feel like with that being, I'm sorry.
So we have time for about one more question, and just to make sure this
And I'll be relatively quick, and I think it's a good. So like literally everyone that I work with is white, straight, male. Donald Trump is running for president. I've been following the stuff, the police and prison stuff over the last couple of years especially. It's been really horrible. It's really, really easy for me to just be a giant misanthrope. And I just want to thank all 5 of you, because you gave me some opportunity I haven't had in a while. So thank
And maybe on that note, we can have another round of applause for our panelists.